I invited my family to my wedding, but no one showed up. When I called my sister, she laughed coldly. Oh, was that today? You'll be divorced soon anyway, so it's a waste of time. My mom sighed over the phone. I'm in Paris right now, enjoying champagne with a view of the Eiffel Tower. Don't bother me with this nonsense. But when they returned home, I was the one smiling. Before we begin the story, take a moment to support us by liking, sharing, and subscribing. Your support means the world to our channel and helps us spread more shocking true stories to light. Now, let's get started. The wedding day that changed everything. I sent out the invitations. I made the calls. I waited. But when my wedding day arrived, the seats reserved for my family remained empty. With my heart pounding, I called my sister, Vanessa. The phone rang twice before she picked up. Vanessa, where are you? The ceremony is about to start. I tried to keep my voice steady, to hide the growing panic inside me. There was silence for a moment. Then, she let out a cold laugh. A laugh that sent a chill down my spine. Oh, was that today? She said, her voice dripping with mockery. Honestly, Melissa, why does it even matter? You'll probably be divorced soon anyway. This whole thing is just a waste of time. My fingers tightened around the phone. My own sister, the person I had once looked up to, was saying this? I swallowed the lump in my throat and ended the call. Maybe Mom would be different. Maybe she'd have an excuse, something reasonable. Desperately, I dialed her number. She picked up after 4 rings. Melissa, I'm busy. I'm in Paris, enjoying a glass of champagne with a perfect view of the Eiffel Tower. Don't bother me with this nonsense. The way she dismissed me so effortlessly, as if I were nothing more than a minor inconvenience, made my chest tighten. Mom, I whispered, but before I could say another word, she sighed in irritation. Grow up, Melissa. No one cares about this little wedding of yours, especially with that. What's his name again? James. I clenched my jaw, my vision blurring. My hands trembled as I hung up. One last hope. Brian. My brother. Maybe he'd show up. Maybe he'd be the one who cared. I dialed his number. He answered after 2 rings. Brian, where are you? The ceremony is starting. My voice cracked, but I held on to the last shred of hope I had left. A long pause. Then a sigh. Melissa, I'm sorry, but there's a surfing competition today. And, well, if Mom and Vanessa aren't going, I didn't think it mattered if I came either. My body felt numb. I couldn't speak. Couldn't breathe. Brian's voice softened. You understand, right? I hung up. I stood there, frozen, my wedding dress flowing around me like a cruel joke. The morning light streamed through the windows, casting a golden glow over everything. Everything except the cold emptiness inside me. James walked in, his white tuxedo perfectly tailored, his expression filled with concern the moment he saw my face. Melissa, he gently took my trembling hand. They're not coming, are they? I shook my head, unable to speak. James cupped my face, his touch warm and steady. Then let's move forward without them. My family is your family now. Tears welled in my eyes, but this time they weren't just from pain. There was something else, something new, a quiet, unshakable strength rising inside me. I took a deep breath. You really mean that? James smiled and pressed a soft kiss to my forehead. Of course. Today is the start of our new life. Let's leave the past behind. And so I walked down the aisle, not with the family I was born into, but with the family I was choosing to build. And for the first time in my life, I realized something. Their absence wasn't my loss. It was theirs. A new family, a new beginning. The wedding proceeded as planned. The music played, the guests stood, and I walked down the aisle. But as I took each step, I couldn't help but notice the empty seats at the front. Seats that were meant for my mother, my sister, and my brother. I had spent my entire life trying to earn their approval, their love. And yet, when it mattered most, they weren't here. Instead, James's father, Robert, stood at the altar, waiting for me with a warm, proud expression. The moment I reached him, he extended his arm. Shall we? He asked gently. I hesitated, my heart still aching from the rejection I had just faced. But then he smiled, a smile filled with kindness, with genuine care. It was a look I had never received from my own father. I nodded, slipping my arm through his. As we walked toward James, my hand stopped shaking. My heart, though bruised, steadied. James's eyes met mine, and in them, I saw everything I had been searching for. Love, security, a promise of something better. The ceremony itself was beautiful. Vows were exchanged, rings slipped on of fingers, and when the officiant finally said, "You may now kiss the bride," James leaned in, his lips brushing mine with a tenderness that made my chest tighten. The guests erupted into applause, and for a moment I forgot about the pain. And then, just as I was about to step away from the altar, Robert, my new father-in-law, stood up. He was a tall, dignified man, with a presence that commanded attention. The room fell silent as he raised a glass. "From today forward," he said, his voice carrying across the hall, "Melissa is a precious member of our family. And let me be clear, those who have hurt her will face consequences." A murmur spread through the crowd. I frowned, glancing at James, who merely squeezed my hand. It wasn't until later that I understood what Robert meant, because I'd been too blinded by love to realize one very important thing. James wasn't just some real estate agent. He was the heir to one of the most powerful business empires in the country, Hamilton Enterprises. And my family had just burned a bridge they didn't even know existed. The truth about James. As the reception carried on, I couldn't shake Robert's words. Those who have hurt her will face consequences. It felt ominous, almost like a warning. James must have noticed my expression because he leaned in, whispering, "Are you okay?" I hesitated before nodding, but in truth, my mind was racing. I thought back to all the little things I had ignored over the years. The way James never talked much about his family, how he always brushed off questions about his career with a simple "I manage real estate" answer. His sudden business trips, his effortless confidence in high-end restaurants, the way people treated him with quiet respect. And then there was Robert, his tailored suit, his authoritative tone, the way everyone seemed to hang onto his every word. Something wasn't adding up. Later that night, after the guests had gone and James and I were finally alone in our suite, I turned to him. "James, what did your father mean when he said those who hurt me would face consequences?" James exhaled slowly, running a hand through his hair. For the first time, he looked hesitant. "There's something I should have told you sooner," he admitted. I folded my arms. "Then tell me now." He took my hands in his. "Melissa, I didn't want you to love me for my name or my family status. I needed to be sure that you loved me for who I am." I blinked. "James, what are you saying?" He took a deep breath. "My full name is James Hamilton. My father is the CEO of Hamilton Enterprises." The room seemed to tilt. "Hamilton Enterprises," I repeated numbly. "As in one of the biggest corporations in the country?" James nodded. "I didn't want you to feel pressured to see me differently. That's why I kept it from you. But I promise you, Melissa, my love for you has nothing to do with my family's wealth or power." I stared at him, my thoughts spinning. My mother, my sister, my brother. If they had known this, would they have treated me differently? Would they have shown up? "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. James squeezed my hands. "Because I wanted you to love me for me, not for what I could offer. And you did." I looked down at my wedding ring, the weight of his words settling in. All my life, I've been told I wasn't enough, that I needed to reach higher, marry richer, be better. And yet, here I was, standing beside a man who had all the wealth and power my family idolized, and he had chosen me. I exhaled, a slow smile forming. "You know," I said softly, "if my family had known, they probably would have come to the wedding." James's expression darkened, and that's exactly why they didn't deserve to be there. I reached up, cupping his cheek. "Thank you for choosing me, even when my own family didn't." He kissed my forehead. "Melissa, from today onward, you're my family. My only family." And for the first time in my life, I truly felt like I belonged. A taste of their own medicine. 6 months passed. 6 months since my wedding. 6 months since my so-called family decided I wasn't worth their time. And in those 6 months, my life had transformed in ways I never could have imagined. I wasn't just Melissa Johnson anymore. I was Melissa Hamilton. After our honeymoon, James encouraged me to take an active role in Hamilton Enterprises. I started as an advisor in the public relations department, learning the ins and outs of the business. But within months, I was promoted to head of public relations, overseeing major corporate campaigns and handling the company's public image. For the first time in my life, I wasn't just working for a paycheck. I was building something. I was somebody. And then, one morning, my past came knocking. It started with an email. When I saw the sender's name, I nearly laughed out loud. Vanessa, the same sister who had sneered at me, belittled my engagement, and mocked my wedding. I clicked on the message. Dear Melissa, I saw your news recently. I had no idea you held such a high position. Why didn't you tell me? I'm sorry about that day. I really was planning to come, but I had an important meeting that day, and you know how work is. How are you? Let's catch up soon. Vanessa. I read it twice, then leaned back in my chair with a smirk. She really thought I would believe that? On my wedding day, she laughed when I called her. She said my marriage would be a waste of time. And now, because she had discovered that I was married to wealth and power, she suddenly wanted to catch up. I didn't even bother replying. But Vanessa wasn't the only one trying to reach me. A few days later, my phone rang. It was a friend from my old life. Melissa, you won't believe it. Your mother, she's been completely shunned by her social circle. I raised an eyebrow. Oh, ever since she got back from Paris, people have been questioning her. They saw you on TV, an executive's wife, married into one of the richest families in the country. And now, everyone is asking her the same thing. Is it true you didn't attend your daughter's wedding? I chuckled, shaking my head. And what does she say? She tries to change the subject, but no one's buying it. You know how those women are. They only care about status. And right now, Barbara Johnson is nothing but an embarrassment. I hummed, tapping my fingers on my desk. So my mother, the woman who dismissed my wedding as nonsense, was now facing social exile. Poetic justice. But the fallout didn't stop there. Vanessa's career took a hit, too. She worked at an upscale fashion boutique, one that catered to San Francisco's elite. And now, customers were recognizing her. Wait, aren't you Melissa Hamilton's sister? They would ask. At first, she must have thought the attention was flattering. But then came the real questions. Is it true you didn't go to her wedding? Why would you do that? You must regret that now, huh? Word spread. People started whispering behind her back. And eventually, it reached the store owner. Vanessa was called into the office. We have an image to maintain, her boss had told her. Our clients don't want to be associated with someone who openly disrespected their own family, especially someone like Melissa Hamilton. 2 weeks later, Vanessa lost her job. And then there was Brian. He had never cared much for social circles or luxury. His life revolved around surfing. But what he did care about was sponsorships, and those were now disappearing. Every single brand he worked with started cutting ties. We can't afford to be associated with someone who disrespected the Hamilton family, one of his biggest sponsors had told him. Just like that, his contracts vanished. His income dried up. And Brian, the carefree beach boy who once looked down on my husband for just selling houses, was now sleeping on a friend's couch, drowning in debt. The mighty Johnson family had fallen. And I was thriving. When the tables turned, weeks passed. My life continued to flourish, while my family's world crumbled around them. And then, one evening, my phone rang. I glanced at the screen. Vanessa. I stared at her name for a long moment before answering. Melissa. Hey. Her voice was softer than I had ever heard it. Gone was the arrogance, the superiority. What remained was something unfamiliar, something almost desperate. I leaned back in my chair, my fingers tapping against my desk. Vanessa. To what do I owe the pleasure? She hesitated. I saw your interview. You looked amazing. I could practically hear her forcing the words out, as if they burned her tongue. I smiled to myself. Thank you. Another long pause. Then she finally said what I knew was coming. Listen, Melissa, I was wondering if we could meet up. Just to talk. You know, like sisters. I closed my eyes, remembering the last real conversation we had. You really have no ambition. Love is just brain chemistry. It doesn't last. The man you've chosen will spend his life selling other people's houses. Now, that same sister, who had dismissed me as small, insignificant, a failure, was asking to meet. Vanessa, I said slowly, the last time I spoke to you, you laughed at me. You told me my marriage wouldn't last. So tell me, what exactly do you want from me now? Silence. I just want to see my sister, she muttered. I let out a dry laugh. Or is it that you want something from Mrs. Hamilton? A sharp inhale. She knew she had been caught. Then she hung up. I set my phone down, exhaling. It had begun. One by one, my family was coming back. Not out of love, but out of necessity. I didn't have to wait long before the next one came crawling. A week later, I received a call from a mutual friend. Melissa, you're not going to believe this. Your mother is asking around about you. I raised an eyebrow. Oh, yeah. Apparently, she's been telling people she wants to make amends with her daughter. But, well, we both know Barbara. She's just embarrassed that everyone knows she skipped your wedding. I chuckled. My mother, the same woman who had dismissed my wedding as trivial, was now feeling the weight of her own actions. But the biggest surprise? Brian. Unlike Vanessa and my mother, Brian had never been one for social climbing. But now he had no job, no money, no sponsors. And so, one day while I was at my office, I received an unexpected visitor. Brian. He stood in the lobby of Hamilton Tower, looking smaller than I had ever seen him. His once golden tan had faded, and there were dark circles under his eyes. The receptionist looked at me. Mrs. Hamilton, he's asking to see you. Should I send him away? I hesitated. Then I nodded. Send him up. A few minutes later, Brian stepped in my office. He looked around, taking in the sleek, luxurious space. The floor-to-ceiling windows, the polished mahogany desk, the subtle scent of fresh lilies. Wow, he muttered. You've really made it. I folded my arms. What do you want, Brian? He sighed, running a hand through his hair. Look, I screwed up. I know that. I should have been there for you. I should have come to your wedding. But Melissa, you didn't think I was worth it. I finished for him. He flinched, but didn't deny it. Melissa, I'm struggling. My sponsors dropped me. I'm drowning in debt. And I need help. I tilted my head. And now, suddenly, you remember you have a sister? Brian looked down. Please, Melissa, I don't need money. I just need a job. Anything. I'll work hard, I promise. I studied him. Unlike Vanessa and my mother, there was no manipulation in his eyes. No arrogance. Just a man who had lost everything and was finally realizing what truly mattered. I leaned back in my chair. Brian, you always thought being a Johnson meant something special. You believed we were above others. Above me. He clenched his jaw but said nothing. But tell me, Brian, what does being a Johnson mean now? Silence. Finally, he whispered, nothing. I exhaled, staring out the window at the city skyline. You're right, I said. It means nothing. Because family isn't about a name. It's about the people who stand beside you when it matters. Brian swallowed hard. I know, and I get it if you don't trust me. But Melissa, I just want a chance to prove that I can be better. I studied him for a long moment. Then, finally I spoke. I'll see what I can do. His head snapped up. Really? But Brian, I said firmly, this isn't a favor. If you work for any company associated with Hamilton Enterprises, you will be expected to work harder than anyone else. No shortcuts, no special treatment. If you mess up, I won't save you. Do you understand? His eyes shone with something I hadn't seen in a long time. Gratitude. Understand. And thank you, Melissa. Really, for the first time in years, I saw a glimpse of the brother I used to know. But as for Vanessa and my mother, they had yet to learn the real lesson. And I had no intention of making it easy for them. The fall of the Johnsons. Brian was the first to break, but I knew he wouldn't be the last. It was only a matter of time before my mother and Vanessa followed. And sure enough, they did. One afternoon, as I was reviewing a major PR campaign for Hamilton Enterprises, my assistant knocked on the door. Mrs. Hamilton, you have visitors. I glanced up from my desk. Who? She hesitated. Your mother and sister. I stared at her for a moment, then let out a small laugh. So, they had finally reached rock bottom. I leaned back in my chair. Did they have an appointment? The assistant swallowed. No, ma'am. They just showed up and insisted on seeing you. Typical. They wouldn't even extend me the basic courtesy of scheduling a meeting. I took my time responding, letting them wait. Then, finally, I nodded. Send them in. A minute later, the door swung open, and there they were. Barbara Johnson, once the queen of social circles, now looked worn down, her once perfectly styled hair dull and lifeless. She was dressed elegantly, but it was clear that the shine of wealth had faded from her life. Vanessa followed behind her, looking nothing like the sister I once knew. The high-end clothes were gone, replaced with something plain, as if she were trying to look humble. They stood there, staring at me. I said nothing, just folded my hands and waited. Finally, my mother spoke. "Melissa," she began, her voice softer than I had ever heard it. "It's been a while." I raised an eyebrow. "Has it?" She flinched at my cold tone, but pushed forward. "Sweetheart, I wanted to see you. We've missed you." I let out a short laugh. "Miss me?" I repeated. Asterisk funny, because the last time I called you, you told me you were in Paris sipping champagne and to not bother you with such nonsense. She paled. Vanessa stepped forward. "Melissa, listen, we made a mistake, okay? We were wrong. About everything. We should have been at your wedding. We should have supported you. And now we just won't make things right." I tilted my head. "Oh, and why now exactly? Why did it take you 6 months to suddenly realize you want to make things right?" They exchanged glances, but I already knew the answer. Because their status, their reputation, their entire lives had fallen apart. My mother no longer had her precious social standing. Vanessa had been fired and was struggling to find work. And they knew that I was the only one who could fix it. I let the silence stretch, letting them squirm. Finally, I stood and walked toward the massive windows behind my desk. "You know," I said, "for years, I tried to be enough for this family. I tried to make you proud, to earn your love. But no matter what I did, it was never enough. I was always the disappointment, the one who settled." I turned to face them. "And yet, here I am, standing in this office, wearing this name. And you are the one standing before me, asking for help." Vanessa's face crumpled. My mother swallowed hard. "Melissa, please." I stared at them. Then, I spoke the words I never thought I'd have the strength to say. "No." Their eyes widened. "No." Vanessa echoed. "That's right," I said. "I don't owe you anything. Not after the way you treated me. Not after you made me feel like I was worth nothing." Tears welled up in my mother's eyes. "Melissa, we're family." I let out a slow breath. "No, Mom, we were family. But you made it very clear on my wedding day that I didn't matter to you." I turned back to my desk, signaling that the conversation was over. "You should leave." Vanessa took a shaky breath. "So that's it? You're just cutting us off?" I looked at her, my expression unreadable. "No, I'm simply treating you the way you treated me. Like I don't exist." They stood there for a moment, completely stunned. And then, slowly, they turned and walked out of my office. For the first time in my life, I felt free. I had spent years chasing their approval, years trying to be enough. But now I didn't need them. They needed me. And I had finally learned my worth. True strength is knowing when to forgive. Weeks passed after my mother and Vanessa left my office. I thought I would feel satisfaction, vindication after turning them away. And for a while I did. But then, something unexpected happened. One evening, as I sat by the fireplace in our home, James walked in and placed a set of documents on the table beside me. "What's this?" I asked, picking them up. He sat across from me, watching my reaction carefully. "It's a report on your mother, Vanessa, and Brian. I had them looked into." I hesitated before flipping through the pages. I had expected to find information about their financial struggles, their lost jobs, their social downfall. And I did. But what I hadn't expected to find was something else. Something that made my heart clench. My mother had lost everything. Her once lavish lifestyle was completely gone. The socialites she used to idolize now ignored her. She had moved into a small one-bedroom apartment, far from the glamorous neighborhood she once called home. Vanessa, once the woman who took pride in status and beauty, had been rejected from every high-end boutique she applied to. No one wanted to hire her. She was working as a cashier in a small-town hair salon. And Brian? He had kept his promise. He had been working tirelessly for one of Hamilton Enterprises' subcontractors, slowly building himself back up. Unlike Vanessa and my mother, he wasn't looking for shortcuts anymore. I let out a slow breath, setting the papers down. James studied me. "So, what do you want to do?" I ran my fingers over the edges of the documents. A part of me wanted to leave things as they were. After all, wasn't this what they deserved? And yet, I thought about the little girl I used to be, the one who just wanted her family to love her. I had fought for so long to be accepted, only to realize that their love had always been conditional. And maybe, just maybe, that was why I had to be the one to break the cycle. I closed my eyes and exhaled. Call them. James raised an eyebrow. Call them. I nodded. Tell them to come to the house. James didn't argue. He knew me well enough to understand that this was something I needed to do. A family rebuilt, one step at a time. The next evening, the doorbell rang. James and I exchanged a glance before I stood and walked to the front door. When I opened it, there they were. My mother, her once confident posture now replaced with something small, fragile. Vanessa, standing slightly behind her, looking unsure of herself. And Brian, the only one who met my gaze without hesitation. Come in, I said softly. They followed me inside, stepping into the warm glow of my home. The house was filled with the soft scent of cinnamon, the warmth of the fireplace crackling in the background. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then, my mother broke the silence. Melissa, she whispered, her voice shaking. I have something to say. I nodded, folding my arms as I waited. She swallowed hard, tears forming in her eyes. I was a terrible mother. I didn't see your worth. I didn't appreciate you. And her voice cracked. I was wrong. The room felt heavy with emotion. Vanessa cleared her throat. Me too, she said quietly. I was awful to you. I put you down when I should have lifted you up. And I don't expect you to forgive me, but I needed to say it. I studied them both. For years, I had dreamed of hearing those words. But now that they were finally here, I realized something important. I didn't need their validation anymore. I had already found my worth. I took a slow breath. You both hurt me deeply, I admitted, and I won't pretend that everything can go back to the way it was overnight. They both nodded, as if bracing themselves for rejection. But then I said something that made their eyes widen. But I'm willing to try. Tears slipped down my mother's cheeks. Vanessa let out a shaky breath. And Brian? For the first time in a long time, he smiled. You mean it? He asked softly. I nodded. Yes. But this time we build something real. No more pretending. No more conditions. If we're going to be a family, it has to be real. My mother reached for my hand, squeezing it. I would like that very much. And as I looked around at them, at the people who had once broken me, I realized something. This wasn't about revenge. It never had been. This was about healing. And for the first time in my life, I finally felt like I was free. A new chapter begins. 5 years later, I stood in my kitchen, the scent of warm spices filling the air as I finished setting the table. Mommy, a tiny voice called out, and I turned just in time to see my daughter, Elizabeth, run into the room, her golden curls bouncing. What is it, sweetheart? I asked, kneeling down. Her bright blue eyes sparkled. Grandma and Uncle Brian are here. I smiled, standing up just as the door opened. My mother stepped inside, her once distant and cold expression replaced by something much softer. Brian followed behind her, looking happy and content, a man who had finally found his path. And then Vanessa. She had moved away, started fresh in a small town as a hairdresser. She didn't live for status anymore. Instead, she had built a life of her own. I never thought we'd be close again. But over the years, we had rebuilt something fragile, something real. She set down a small wrapped box and ruffled Elizabeth's hair. Merry Christmas, kiddo. Elizabeth beamed. Thank you, Aunt Vanessa. James entered the room, wrapping an arm around my waist. Ready? He asked, pressing a kiss to my temple. I looked around at my family, the one I had chosen, the one I had rebuilt, more than ever. And as we sat down to dinner, laughter filling the air, I finally understood. Family isn't just about blood. It's about the people who choose to stand beside you. And in the end, I had found mine. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit that like button, share this video with your friends, and subscribe for more real-life family dramas. Let me know in the comments what you think about today's story. Was it fair or totally messed up? See you in the next one.